The Galactic Concord had stood for 12,000 years, a vast alliance of 637 species bound together by treaties, trade, and the unspoken agreement that the strong would always rule the weak. At the heart of it all sat the High Sovereign Council on the station world of Varanthos Prime, a place so ancient that its walls had witnessed the rise and fall of empires that most species had already forgotten. Humanity had been part of this grand alliance for only 74 years. That was nothing in galactic time, a single breath in the life of a civilization that measured its history in millennia. And the galaxy never let them forget it. Ambassador Ravon Ortega stood at the center of the council chamber, a massive circular room carved from pale stone and lit by floating orbs of blue light that drifted near the ceiling like captive stars. She was a tall woman with dark hair pulled back tight and a face that gave away nothing. Around her, rising in tiered rows like a coliseum, sat the representatives of hundreds of species: insectoid, reptilian, crystalline, gaseous, and forms that had no easy description in any human language. Most of them were not looking at her. Some were talking among themselves. A few had not even bothered to turn their visual organs in her direction. She was used to it. "Honored members of the council," Ortega began, her voice steady and calm, "I am here on behalf of the United Human Coalition to formally request expanded trade access and colonial mining rights in the Outer Vale region." She paused and let her gaze sweep across the chamber. The Outer Vale remains unclaimed and undeveloped. Its resources could benefit not just humanity, but any member state willing to participate in joint ventures. Silence followed, but not the kind that meant anyone was thinking. It was the silence of people waiting for a minor annoyance to finish speaking. Then a voice cut through the chamber like a blade made of ice. "How delightful," said Arch-Sovereign Phila of the Valkyrie Dominion, her long silver frame unfolding from the highest seat in the room. She had 4 arms, each ending in fingers like needles, and eyes that glowed a soft and terrible gold. She was over 300 years old, and she had held her seat on the council for most of that time. "The galaxy's shortest-lived mistake wishes to dig holes in the dirt," Phila continued, and a ripple of quiet laughter moved through the chamber. "Perhaps we should let them. They are so very good at digging their own graves." Ortega did not flinch. She had heard worse. She had heard worse in this very room, standing in this very spot, year after year. "The petition is noted," said the council clerk, a small Jorath with trembling antennae, "and it is denied by majority consensus. Next matter." Her documents inclined her head with perfect diplomatic grace and walked out of the chamber without a single word of protest. She had learned long ago that dignity was the only weapon this room allowed her to carry. But far above the council floor, in a sealed chamber that appeared on no official map of Varanthos Prime, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. Phyla sat at the head of a narrow table made of black glass. To her left was High Commander Droth of the Draelith Compact, a massive figure covered in armored scales, the color of dried blood. To her right was Prime Sovereign Ulix of the Orsathan Hegemony, a being that resembled a cluster of floating orbs connected by threads of pale light. These 3 represented the true power behind the council, 3 of the 5 permanent members, and together they held enough votes and military force to shape the galaxy however they wished. The latest projections are in, sliding a data tablet across the table. Human population growth across their 19 colonies has increased by 14% in the last decade alone. Their technological adoption rate is the fastest we have ever recorded for a species at their developmental stage. "It is not just the numbers," Ulix added, its voice like wind passing through hollow glass. "It is the pattern. They adapt to every environment we have seen them enter. Desert worlds, ice worlds, high-gravity stations. They do not merely survive, they thrive, and they do it faster than any model predicted." Thyla studied the data with those golden eyes, and for the first time in a very long while, something cold moved behind them. It was not anger. It was fear. In 200 years, she said quietly, they will outnumber us. In 300, they will outproduce us. In 500, if left unchecked, they will own the outer veil, the mid-reach, and half of everything we have. Spent millennia building. Then we do not leave them unchecked, Droth said. The room went still. There is a colony, Droth continued, pulling up a holographic display of a green and golden world spinning slowly in the air above the table. HFY 4, a farming world in the human frontier. Population of roughly 1.2 million. No significant military presence. It is soft, it is remote, and it is perfect. A strike, Thyla murmured. A message, Droth corrected. We hit them hard enough to break their spirit. We frame it as a police action against illegal militias. The rest of the Concord will accept it, because they always accept what we tell them. Ullix pulsed with a pale and sickly light. And if the humans do not break? Thyla almost smiled. They are farmers and traders, she said. They write poetry and build gardens. They will break. Every species does. The resolution was passed in secret, signed by 3 marks and sealed with codes that would never appear in any public record. They called it Operation Quiet Mercy. 200 warships from the Velkari and Draelith fleets were quietly reassigned to the human frontier. They moved through back channels and dark corridors of space where no patrol ships traveled. The strike was set for 14 days from now. On the other side of the galaxy, Ambassador Ravon Ortega sat in her small office aboard the human diplomatic station, reviewing the day's failures with the same patience she brought to everything. Her terminal chimed. She glanced at it and saw an incoming transmission from HFY 4, marked urgent. She opened the channel. The screen filled with static and noise and fragments of a voice she could barely hear. A woman screaming something about ships in the sky, about fire, about the fields burning. Then the feed cut to nothing. Ortega stared at the dead screen for a long time. Her hands did not shake. Her breath did not quicken. Something behind her eyes shifted. Something old and deep and terribly, terribly calm. She reached for her communicator and opened a channel to Earth. "This is Ortega," she said, and her voice was the quietest it had ever been. "Get me Fleet Command. Get me everyone." The bombardment of HFY 4 lasted 9 hours. 200 warships hung in the sky above the colony like a wall of iron and fire, and they poured death onto the surface with the kind of precision that could only come from a plan that had been made long in advance. The first wave struck the communication towers, so no one could call for help. The second wave hit the power grid, so no one could see in the dark. The third wave was not a wave at all. It was ground troops, thousands of Velkari and Draelith soldiers who marched through the burning wheat fields and into the settlements with weapons drawn and orders that left no room for mercy. HFY 4 was a farming world. Its people grew grain and raised livestock, and built little towns with white fences and schools where children learned the names of stars they might one day visit. It had no military base, no weapons depot, no fleet of warships hidden behind its moon. It had families. By the time the last shot was fired, over 800,000 human beings were dead. The fields that had once been gold were black. The rivers ran gray with ash. The schools were rubble. And across the Galactic Concord, the official report called it a police action against illegal human militias operating in violation of frontier accords. No evidence of any militia was ever produced. No one on the council asked for any. Captain Jonah Mwangi was a cargo hauler, a simple man who flew a simple ship between human colonies, carrying grain and machine parts, and sometimes letters from people who preferred the old ways of saying things that mattered. He arrived at Elisara 4, 12 hours after the attack, because his scheduled delivery route brought him there, and because nobody had told him not to come. When his ship broke through the atmosphere and he saw what waited below, he did not say a word. He landed in what had once been the central plaza of New Carthage, the colony's largest town. The plaza was gone. Everything was gone. He walked through the ruins for 3 hours, stepping over things he would never be able to forget no matter how long he lived. He found a child's shoe fused to the melted surface of what had been a road. A small shoe, barely worn, still bright blue under the layer of soot. He picked it up and held it in both hands, and he stood there in the silence of a dead world, and he did not scream, and he did not cry. He just went very, very quiet, and something in his eyes changed forever. On Earth, the news broke at midday. It moved through every city and every home and every device on the planet in a matter of minutes. And what happened next was something no species in the galaxy had ever witnessed before. There were no riots. There were no mobs in the streets, breaking windows and burning cars. Hysteria. No wailing. No chaos. What there was instead was silence. A deep and vast and absolute silence that settled over the entire human species like snow falling on a frozen lake. And then, without anyone giving an order, without any government announcement, without a single official directive, everything began to move. Factories that had been building agricultural equipment shifted their production lines overnight and started producing things that had no place on a farm. Civilian cargo ships reported to retrofitting stations where engineers worked without sleep to install armor plating and weapon systems that had been designed years ago and stored in files marked emergency use only. Enlistment offices opened at dawn, and the lines that formed outside them wrapped around entire city blocks and stretched into the distance. And every single person standing in those lines was calm. They did not chant. They did not wave flags. Waited with the patience of people who had already made a decision that nothing in the universe could undo. Fleet Admiral Keita Sato was a woman of 53 years, with short gray hair, and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone who did not believe in unnecessary detail. She had served in the Human Defense Forces for 30 years, and in all that time she had never raised her voice. Not once, not ever. When the emergency authority was placed in her hands, and she was given command of the newly consolidated United Human Expeditionary Command, she accepted it with a single nod and immediately went to work. 48 hours after the massacre, she addressed the entire human species in a broadcast that was watched by every man, woman, and child across all 19 colonies and the homeworld. She stood in front of a plain gray wall, with no flags, no symbols, no decoration of any kind. "They believe we are soft because we farm," said, and her voice was flat and even and carried no heat at all. "They believe we are weak because we trade. They believe we are afraid because we have spent 74 years asking politely for things that should have been freely given." She paused and looked directly into the camera. "They will learn what happens when you give humanity a reason to remember what it was built for." That was all she said. The broadcast lasted 41 seconds. Across the galaxy, every intelligence agency that mattered recorded that message and analyzed every word, every pause, every micro-expression on her face. The Rythani Collective, a species known for their ability to read emotional patterns across all known life forms, released an internal memo that was later leaked to the press. It said simply, "We have studied 4,000 species across 12,000 years of galactic history. When humans go quiet, it is already too late. Recommend immediate withdrawal of all Rythani personnel from Valkyrie space." The Jorath Federation, an old and cautious people who had survived by never choosing the wrong side in a conflict, quietly recalled their ambassador from Varanthos Prime and said nothing publicly. Even the species that had voted with the council began to feel something they could not quite name. A cold pressure in the air, like the stillness before a storm that was still too far away to see, but close enough to feel in the bones. And in the deep black of space, far from any shipping lane, far from any patrol route, orbiting the frozen moon of Titan in Earth's own solar system, something was happening that no alien database had ever recorded. Lights came on inside a cavern so vast it could have held a city. Row after row of ships filled the darkness, sleek, angular, and black as the void between stars, built with a kind of brutal elegance that made them look less like machines and more like predators waking from a long and patient sleep. They had no names on any registry. They had no service records in any fleet database. They were ghosts, built in secret, maintained in silence, and kept in the dark for a day that every human admiral had prayed would never come. One by one, their engines powered up, and the cavern filled with a low and steady hum that vibrated through the rock and the ice, and the silence of a species that had finished asking nicely. Captain Jonah Mwangi still stood on the surface of Elisara 4, holding a child's blue shoe, staring at nothing. Behind him, the first human relief ships were beginning to land. Around him, the ashes of 800,000 lives drifted in a wind that smelled like the end of something old, and the beginning of something the galaxy was not ready for. Humanity did not declare war. There was no formal announcement, no broadcast to the galaxy, no dramatic speech before the council chambers, no ultimatum with a deadline attached. One morning the galaxy simply woke up and discovered that the Velkari border fortress of Keth Varanus had gone dark. Keth Varanus was not just any military installation, it was a legend, a station the size of a small moon that had stood unconquered for 6,000 years at the edge of Velkari space. It had shields that could withstand a supernova's edge, automated defense grids controlled by artificial minds that never slept, and 6 full perimeter fleets rotating around it in constant patrol. No species had ever breached it. No species had ever even tried. When the Velkari scout ships arrived to investigate the communications blackout, they found the station intact. Every wall, every corridor, every system still in place. But it was powered down. It was empty. 11,000 Velkari soldiers had vanished without a trace. No bodies, no blood, no signs of combat, no evidence of forced entry. They were simply gone, as if they had never existed at all. The only thing left behind was a message carved into the floor of the command deck in perfect Velkari script, not scratched or burned, but carved with a precision that suggested someone had taken their time. It read, "This is day 1. The galaxy did not panic immediately. Panic requires understanding, and no one understood what had just happened. But fear, that came quickly. Intelligence agencies across 100 species scrambled to analyze the event, and every analysis came back with the same impossible conclusion. The humans had somehow infiltrated the most secure military installation in the known galaxy, neutralized its entire garrison without firing a single shot, and left nothing behind but a promise. The Draelith Compact received the report in his war room, and read it 3 times before he spoke. "How?" he asked his intelligence chief. The chief had no answer. "How long have they been able to do this?" Droth asked. The chief still had no answer, and the silence that followed that question was worse than anything the Draelith had faced in 1,000 years of warfare. Because the answer, as the galaxy would slowly come to understand, was that humanity had been able to do this for a very long time. They had hoped they would never have to. Fleet Admiral Kaida Sato did not command from a throne or a grand war room filled with holographic displays. She commanded from a plain metal desk aboard the carrier ship Remembrance, and she drank black coffee from a dented tin cup while she dismantled an empire. The human counteroffensive did not look like any war the galaxy had seen before. There were no grand fleet battles, no dramatic clashes between armadas in open space. Instead, there was precision, cold, surgical, and absolutely devastating precision. Human strike teams hit the Dralith compact supply chain with the accuracy of a surgeon removing a tumor. Fuel depots destroyed, communication relays disabled, logistics hubs captured and stripped of data before being quietly abandoned. Every target was chosen not for its military value alone, but for its position in a web of dependencies that human intelligence analysts had been mapping for decades. They knew which fuel station supplied which fleet. They knew which communication relay connected which command structure. They knew the name of every supply officer and the schedule of every cargo run. Within 2 weeks, the Dralith Compact's outer territories, 17 star systems containing billions of citizens, were effectively cut off from their homeworld. No supplies came in, no orders went out. Compact's war machine did not collapse in fire. It starved in silence. And then Commander Lena Vasquez did something that changed everything. Vasquez was a woman built like a cable, thin, hard, and impossible to break. And she led a team of 40 human operatives on a mission that military historians would later call the single most audacious intelligence operation in galactic history. They infiltrated the Ur-Sathan hegemony's Central Intelligence Archive, a data vault buried inside an asteroid that was guarded by 3 fleets, 2 orbital defense platforms, and a security system so complex that its own designers did not fully understand it. Vasquez's team got in, copied everything, and got out in under 6 hours. Then she transmitted the contents of that archive to every neutral species in the galactic Concord, unedited, unfiltered, and completely without commentary. The files told a story that made the galaxy's blood run cold. Decades of conspiracy against humanity laid out in meticulous detail. Secret meetings, classified resolutions, military planning documents, bioweapon research programs specifically targeting human DNA, designed to create plagues that would kill humans and only humans. And worst of all, detailed plans to partition Earth's solar system among the 3 conspirator species after humanity had been sufficiently reduced, plans that included population targets, resource allocation schedules, and even preliminary designs for mining operations on Mars and Europa. The neutral species reacted with horror. The Rithani Collective issued a formal condemnation of the Council within hours, calling the conspiracy a stain on 12,000 years of galactic civilization. The Jorath Federation went further. They opened their borders to human refugees and offered full humanitarian aid to every human colony that requested it. Began to shift, and the diplomatic isolation of the 3 conspirators accelerated like a landslide gaining speed. On Varanthos Prime, Arch-Sovereign Thyla watched her alliance crumble from the same chamber where she had once mocked Ambassador Ortega. She convened an emergency session and stood before the council with fire in her golden eyes, demanding that the remaining member species join the war against humanity. "They are a threat to all of us," she declared, her voice ringing off the ancient walls. "What they have done to the Compact, they will do to you. What they have done to Keth Varunis, they will do to your fortresses. There is still time to stop them if we stand together." The chamber was half empty. The species that had bothered to attend stared at her with expressions ranging from pity to contempt, and not a single delegate spoke in her support. The silence was its own answer. Thyla stood there for a long moment, her forearms hanging at her sides, and for the first time in 300 years, she looked old. Her aide, a young Velkari named Subconsul Aerith, approached her with a data tablet in his trembling hands. "Arch-Sovereign," he whispered, "you need to see this." She took the tablet and looked at it, and every drop of color drained from her silver face. Human ships had been detected in the Varanthos approach, the narrow corridor of space that led directly to the Council's capital world. The initial count was 400 vessels. Then the sensors updated, 800, then again, 1,600, then again. The final count, when the sensors stopped updating and the intelligence officers stopped pretending they were not afraid, was over 4,000 human warships moving in perfect formation toward the heart of galactic civilization. And at the front of that fleet, aboard the carrier Remembrance, Fleet Admiral Kaida Sato set down her coffee cup and looked at the tactical display with the same expression she wore when reviewing supply requisitions. "Signal the fleet," she said quietly. "Standard approach. No weapons hot. We are not here to destroy anything." Her first officer looked at her with something between awe and confusion. "Then what are we here to do, Admiral?" Sato looked at the image of Varanthos Prime, growing larger on the screen ahead. The ancient seat of power that had ruled the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed. "We are here to give them a choice," she said. "That is more than they gave us." 4,200 human warships settled into a perfect sphere around Varanthos Prime, and the galaxy held its breath. The formation was mathematically precise, every ship equidistant from its neighbors, every weapon system powered but not armed, every shield raised but not locked. From a distance, the blockade looked like a net made of dark metal, drawn tight around the ancient station world, and inside that net, 12 billion beings from hundreds of species looked up at their sky and saw the thing they had been told could never happen. Humans at their door. Not begging, not petitioning, not standing in the low seat of the council chamber waiting to be dismissed. Humans with guns. Fleet Admiral Kaida Sato broadcast on every frequency, military, civilian, diplomatic, emergency, and several that were supposed to be secret, but that human intelligence had cracked years ago. Her message was short. United Human Expeditionary Command, Varanthos Prime is now under full blockade. No ships enter, no ships leave, no orbital weapons will be fired, no ground assault will be launched. No one dies today unless you choose it. We are not you. That last line, "We are not you," hit the galaxy harder than any weapon could have. In the hours that followed, every species with a functioning news network played that message on repeat, and analysts from 100 worlds tried to understand what they were witnessing. The humans had brought enough firepower to reduce Varanthos Prime to a cloud of burning debris. The Black Fleet alone, those ghost ships from the Titan shipyard, carried weapons that no galactic database had ever catalogued. They could have ended everything in a single devastating barrage. Instead, they waited. And the waiting was worse than any attack, because it forced everyone inside that blockade to sit with the knowledge that their survival depended on their choices. Was a choice being made by the very species they had tried to destroy. Inside the council chambers, chaos erupted in a way that the ancient halls had never seen. The Draelith Compact broke first. High Commander Droth, the same armored giant who had proposed the strike on Elisara IV, appeared on a diplomatic channel 48 hours into the blockade and transmitted an unconditional surrender to the human fleet. His voice was flat and dead, stripped of the deep rumble that had once made junior officers flinch. "The Draelith Compact acknowledges its role in the massacre of Elisara IV," he said. "We submit to whatever terms humanity requires. We ask only that our civilian population be spared." The surrender was accepted without negotiation. 12 hours later, the Or-Sathan hegemony collapsed, not from any external pressure, but from within. The hegemony's own citizens, a species of linked consciousness that shared emotions across vast distances, had felt the grief of Elisara IV radiating from the human colonies for weeks, a psychic wound so deep and so raw that it had disrupted their collective harmony. They overthrew Prime Sovereign Ullix in a matter of hours and broadcast a message of their own, not to the human fleet, but to humanity itself. "We felt your pain," they said. "We should have felt it before it was too late. We are sorry. That word is not enough, but it is all we have. Thyla was alone. She stood in the council chamber, surrounded by empty seats and the ghosts of alliances that had crumbled like sand, and she watched the data feeds with her golden eyes, burning with something that was no longer fear, and no longer anger, but something older and more dangerous than both. She had one card left to play. She activated a hidden console built into the base of her throne, a console that only 3 living beings knew existed, and she entered a code that had been passed down through Velkari leaders for over 2 centuries. Deep beneath Varanthos Prime, in a vault that did not appear on any blueprint, a weapon system began to wake up. It was a planet killer, an array of focused energy projectors built into the core of the station world itself, capable of firing a beam across interstellar distances with enough power to destabilize a star. It was pointed at Earth's sun. It had always been pointed at Earth's sun. Thyla turned to face the chamber, and even though she was alone, she spoke as if the entire galaxy could hear her. And it could, because she had opened every channel. "You think you have won," she said, her voice trembling with desperate triumph. "You think your little blockade and your black ships and your silence have beaten us, but I hold the fire of your star in my hands. One command from me, and your sun tears itself apart, and your precious homeworld burns. Call off your fleet, or I will end your species at its root." The message reached the human fleet in seconds. It reached Ambassador Rivan Ortega, who was at that very moment walking through the corridors of Varanthos Prime toward the council chamber, alone and unarmed, just as she had planned. She entered the chamber and saw Thyla standing there, with her hand on the console, shaking with rage and fear, and the weight of everything she had done. Ortega stopped, looked at her, and did not flinch. "The array is dead, Thyla," Ortega said, and her voice was calm and steady, and carried no anger at all. "It has been dead for 6 days. My people found it, studied it, and neutralized it before our fleet was even in range. You are pointing an empty weapon at a species that learned to check for traps before it learned to walk upright." The light went out of Thyla's eyes. Not all at once. It drained slowly, like water leaving a cracked vessel, and she stared at Ortega with an expression that was not hatred or fury, but something much worse. It was the realization that she had never been in control. Not during the conspiracy, not during the massacre, not during the war, and not now. She had been playing a game against a species that had already read every page of the rulebook and written a few chapters of their own. Her hand fell from the console. Her legs gave way beneath her, and she sank to the floor of the chamber where she had ruled for 3 centuries, and she did not make a sound. From the shadows near the back of the room, a young Velkari stepped forward. Sub-Consul Aerith had watched his Arch-Sovereign's final gambit with eyes wide and hearts pounding. And now he watched her fall, and he felt something break inside him that had been cracking for a long time. He looked at the broken figure of Thyla on the floor. He looked at Ortega, who stood in the center of the room like a statue carved from patience. He reached up and removed his rank insignia, the silver crest of the Velkari diplomatic corps that he had worn with pride since the day it was pinned to his chest, and he set it gently on the nearest table. "Ambassador Ortega," he said, and his voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "I formally request asylum with the human delegation. I cannot serve a government that did what mine has done." Ortega looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly, but recognition, the look of someone who has just seen the first green shoot pushing through burned ground. "Granted," she said. Aerith was the first Velkari to defect. Within the hour, he was not the last. Other aides, junior diplomats, military officers who had carried the weight of their government's crimes in silence, one by one They came forward, removed their insignia, and asked for shelter with the people their leaders had tried to oppress. Ortega watched them come, and she waited until the chamber was still again before she finally spoke. Not to Phila, not to the defectors, but to the council itself, to the empty seats and the watching cameras and the galaxy beyond. Her voice was steady, and it carried the weight of 800,000 lives that would never speak again. "We came to this galaxy with open hands," she said. "We asked for trade, and you gave us contempt. We asked for fairness, and you gave us silence. We asked for nothing more than a place at the table, and you answered with a massacre of farmers and children and people who had never raised a weapon against anyone." She paused and let the silence fill the room like water rising. "And even now, we are offering you a door instead of a grave. Take it. There will not be a third chance." The Varanthos Accords were signed on a Tuesday, a detail that meant nothing to the rest of the galaxy, but that humans found quietly appropriate, because Tuesdays were ordinary days, and they wanted peace to feel ordinary. The ceremony took place in the same council chamber where Ambassador Ortega had been mocked and dismissed and ignored for years. But the room looked different now. The highest seat, the one Thyla had occupied for 3 centuries, had been removed, and in its place was a simple round table with chairs of equal height arranged around it. No seat was higher than any other. No species looked down on another. The Accords themselves were the most significant restructuring of galactic governance in 12,000 years. The 5 permanent council seats were abolished, the ancient privilege that had allowed a handful of species to dictate the fate of hundreds was gone, replaced by a rotating council with equal representation for every species, member state regardless of size, age, or military power. When the document was finalized, the delegates offered humanity 3 permanent seats in recognition of what they had endured and what they had chosen not to do when they had the power to do anything they wanted. Ortega looked at the offer for a long time. Then she shook her head. "1 seat," she said. "The same as everyone else. Power should be earned each cycle, not inherited. That is the whole point of what we are building here." The chamber went silent, and in that silence, something shifted in the way the galaxy understood the species it had once dismissed as primitive. This was not mercy. Mercy implied superiority. This was principle, and it was harder to argue with than any fleet. The war crimes tribunals began 3 weeks later. They were held on Varanthos Prime, in a hall of justice that had not been used in over 1,000 years, and they were conducted under Concord law, not human law. This was humanity's decision, and it was deliberate. When their allies suggested that human courts should try the architects of the Elisara IV massacre, Fleet Admiral Sato refused. "If we use our own laws to judge them, it becomes revenge wearing a judge's robe," she said. "If we use their laws, the laws they built and claim to believe in, then it becomes something they cannot deny." Arch-Sovereign Thyla stood trial alongside 14 senior military commanders from the Valkyrie and Draelith forces. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the intelligence files that Commander Vasquez had liberated from the Ur-Sathan archives, but testimony from defectors, intercepted communications, and the quiet, damning weight of orbital bombardment logs that recorded every shot fired at a world that had no weapons to fire back. Thyla did not speak in her own defense. She sat in the accused chair with her forearms folded, and her golden eyes fixed on some point in the distance that no one else could see. And she listened to the accounting of what she had done with the expression of someone who had already judged herself more harshly than any court ever could. She was sentenced to permanent exile on a barren moon at the edge of known space, a place with breathable air and basic supplies, but nothing else. A place where she would live out whatever remained of her long life, alone with the memory of 800,000 ghosts. She was not executed. The galaxy noticed. A Rithani commentator wrote that the sentence revealed more about humanity than the entire war had. That a species capable of building a fleet that could darken a sky had chosen to answer the worst crime in living memory with isolation instead of death, with silence instead of spectacle. They could have killed her, the commentator wrote. Every species in history would have killed her. They gave her a room and a window and the chance to live out her days, the rest of her life, to think about what she did. That is not weakness. That is a punishment designed by a species that understands suffering better than anyone who has ever tried to inflict it. On Elisara 4, the rebuilding began. It was slow at first. The soil was poisoned, the water tables were contaminated, and the radiation from the orbital bombardment had made large sections of the surface uninhabitable without protective equipment. But humans were, as the galaxy was learning, unreasonably stubborn about growing things in places where nothing should grow. The first construction crews arrived within a month of the Accords, and they were not all human. Valkyrie volunteers came, not soldiers, not diplomats, but ordinary citizens who had watched the trial of their arch-sovereign and felt something break open inside them that shame alone could not explain. They came by the hundreds, then by the thousands, and they worked alongside humans in the ash and the dust without being asked, and without asking for anything in return. Subconsul Aerith, the young aide who had removed his insignia in the council chamber, led the Valkyrie restoration effort personally. He worked with his bare hands in the soil of a world his government had burned, and when a human journalist asked him why, he stood there with dirt under his needle-thin fingers and said something that became one of the most quoted sentences in galactic history. "Because my people did this," he said, "and if my people do not help undo it, then the stain is forever. I would rather spend my life on my knees in this dirt than stand tall on clean ground knowing I did nothing." At the epicenter of the bombardment, the exact coordinates where the first orbital strike had hit the surface, a memorial was built. It was not a statue or a monument or a wall of names, though all of those existed elsewhere on the planet. It was a garden, circular garden, planted in soil that scientists had said would not support life for another 50 years, tended by human and alien hands working side by side, filled with plants from 100 worlds that had no business growing in the same earth, but did so anyway, because someone had decided they would. Captain Jonah Mwangi returned to Elisara 4 on the second anniversary of the massacre. He had not been back since that first terrible day, when he had walked through the ruins and picked up a child's shoe, and felt the world change beneath his feet. He walked to the place where he had found that shoe, and he stopped. A tree was growing there. It was a Terran oak, impossibly tall for its age, its trunk thick and its branches wide, its leaves so green they almost hurt to look at, as if the soil itself had decided to prove something to anyone who doubted what could grow in a place where everything had been destroyed. Mwangi stood under that tree for a long time, and for the first time since the day the world burned, he let himself cry. Not from grief, though the grief was still there and always would be. From something else, from the stubborn, impossible, unreasonable proof that life did not care what had been done to this place. It was going to grow anyway. 6 months after the Accords, Fleet Admiral Sato held a ceremony in the Titan shipyard where the Black Fleet had been born. The ghost ships, the secret weapons that had never appeared on any registry, that had been humanity's hidden fist for decades, were lined up in rows inside the vast cavern. Their engines cold, their weapons silent. One by one they were powered down for the final time. Their hulls were cut apart by automated systems, and the materials, the rare metals, the advanced composites, the quantum processors, were cataloged, packaged, and shipped to construction sites across the former conflict zones. Build hospitals, research stations, and schools. A journalist asked Sato why she was destroying humanity's greatest military asset, the fleet that had brought the galaxy's oldest powers to their knees. Sato looked at the journalist with those stone-carved features and said, "Because the goal was never to have them. The goal was to never need them again." 5 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways that the old council could never have imagined and would never have allowed. Human-alien joint ventures opened the outer veil to cooperative exploration. Former enemy species worked together in research labs, on colony ships, and in the shared mess halls of deep space stations where the food was bad, but the company was honest. It was not perfect. It was never going to be perfect. But it was real, and it was growing, and every day it grew a little more. Ambassador Ravon Ortega, now in her 70s, sat in her chair in the new council chamber. The same chair she had always sat in, no higher and no lower than any other. A young Draelith delegate approached her with nervous steps, his scaled hands clutching a data tablet. "Ambassador," he said, "I have a proposal. A joint human-Draelith deep space exploration initiative. We believe that our species could accomplish together what neither could accomplish alone." He held out the tablet like an offering, and his eyes were bright with the particular kind of hope that only belongs to someone who is young enough to believe that the future can be better than the past. Ortega looked at him, and something happened to her face that had not happened in a very long time. She smiled. It was not a diplomatic smile, not the careful, measured expression she had worn like armor for decades. It was real, tired and worn and cracked at the edges, but real. She reached out and took the tablet, and then she gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Down," she said. "Tell me everything." The galaxy had once asked itself what humanity would become if given enough time. Now it knew. Given enough time, given enough pain, given every reason to become the monsters that others had tried to make them. They had chosen, with bloodied hands and broken hearts, to build something better instead. And that, more than any fleet or any weapon, was the thing that made the stars themselves take notice.